everyone. Welcome to Lab 4. The heart is what we're going to focus on this. So the next 3 labs for the lab midterm will focus on the cardiovascular system. Now for the summer, the way the schedule had worked out for us based on how many times we're allowed to, how many weeks of being a 10-week course is a little less time than typical. One of the things is we must be able to complete everything on time, so we're doing a chapter a week. But in this case, we're having to combine the cardiovascular system, the blood vessels, all in one lab. So there will only be there'll actually be a combined. So you'll just have to. I'm going to go ahead and say it here. I'm redoing this lab so that when you do blood vessels, just remember you're going to have to do them all together. Labs 5 and 6. So anyway, what we're going to look at is our heart today, and some of this you may have already seen if you've already watched the lecture. If you haven't watched the lecture yet, then which you may not have actually, depending on where you guys are. I'm recording this right before I finish the schedule for your course, so you may not be there yet. But the heart, it is a hollow muscular pump, and it pumps blood through miles of blood vessels. There's really enough blood vessels when you count all the capillaries in the body to be able to wrap around the earth about 3 times at the equator. Now, the mediastinum is the area. Remember, that's the area between the 2 lungs. So the mediastinum, which is between the lungs. And when you look at the heart anatomically, it has 2/3 of its mass lying to the left of the midline of the body, right? Here's that midline. And 2/3 of that mass is to the left of that midline. Now, there is a portion of the heart, the pointed end of the heart, that projects inferiorly called the apex. Now, it points inferiorly or downward and towards the left. The base, the broad end of the heart, is going to be found on top or superiorly and a little bit more on the right side, to the right of the apex. Now, we are going to see the pericardium, the heart wall, the chambers of the heart, the valves, and the great vessels of the heart in this lab. These are what we're going to focus on. So we're actually going to start with the pericardium. Now, the pericardium, what I'm going to do before I actually do anything else is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw out pericardium. Now, I also did this in lecture as well. So if you have watched lecture first, I don't know which one you guys are watching first, but if you have watched the lecture, you've already seen this. But we're going to do the pericardium again, and we're going to start off just with a circle here, and I'm going to label that the body wall. So that would be the chest wall there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw our heart there. We're going to draw the most anatomically accurate heart that we ever have. Okay, there we go. Again, now if you guys don't know that, the stylized heart is actually the combination of 2 anatomical hearts combined together would make a space like that. That's where it gets that's why that's the symbol for love. It represents the negative space taken up by 2 combined hearts. So that's why it's symbol of love. Now, what we're going to do is we have a serous membrane. Now remember, serous membranes, this is going to be the pericardium. Serous membranes always have 2 layers to them. The 2 layers that they have are going to be a visceral layer that's always on the organ itself. So in this case, the heart. So that means there is going to be a visceral layer, and the visceral layer of the heart, now this is actually part of the heart wall, so really it should be as close to the heart as I can actually get it, but it's very hard for me to draw it too close. But this is called the visceral pericardium. Now remember, visceral layers are always associated to the heart or organ itself. It's actually on the organ. Then it folds up, and there's a second layer because this is a double-lined, sealed membrane. So double lined and sealed. And this is the parietal layer. A way to remember how to spell parietal. Remember right, parietal. You got to sing it like Bad Romance, and you guys can remember how to spell parietal. Parietal, parietal. The parietal pericardium, and that's a good way to remember how to spell it. I always struggle with parietal. I don't know why it was such a hard word for me to spell as a student. So there are going to be these two major components here of a pericardium. So this gives us our pericardium, the serous membrane surrounding the heart. Now, being it that it surrounds the heart, it is a double-lined sealed membrane, 2 layers. Remember that. Now, I talk about that more in detail in lecture. In lab, we're just going to really discuss that there's a parietal pericardium of 3 distinctive layers. There is a dense irregular connective tissue layer called the fibrous connective tissue layer. This is what makes this very tough and durable. See, the fibrous layer makes sure the parietal pericardium cannot stretch outwards very much at all. And in fact, anytime any fluids accumulate between the visceral and parietal pericardium, this is going to make the pressures push inward onto the heart and strangulate it and squeeze it, as in congestive heart failure. Not only that, but you can get a condition called cardiac tamponade. Now, what's going to happen here is we have on the inside what is called a mesothelium. Now, we have our fibrous connective tissue layer. There is the mesothelium, and what mesothelium is the simple squamous epithelium that lines the inside of the parietal pericardium, but also lines the inside of the visceral pericardium as well. And what's going to happen is there's a space between those, and hence mesothelium. Why is it called mesothelium? Well, basically what it's going to do is it's just going to fit both ways here, lining the inside here and the inside here. So since you will have that lining like that and like that, so it's going to line the inner surfaces on both sides, sandwiched between, hence mesothelium. Okay. Now, what we're also going to see is there's the visceral pericardium. Sorry, I almost forgot to mention that the parietal pericardium has the areolar connective tissue layer, which is the loose connective tissues associated. Now, the visceral pericardium does not have that dense fibrous layer of dense irregular connective tissues. In fact, it's only got the 2. Now, another name for it is called the epicardium because it is found upon the heart muscle. It covers the surface of the heart, where parietal pericardium is the lining of the pericardial sac. It's the outer covering of the pericardial sac, where the endocardium is the outer surface of the heart, covering the heart's muscular tissue, making this part of the heart wall. Now, the mesothelium here, again, is the simple squamous epithelium, and there's an areolar loose connective tissue layer. Now, as we look at this, you could see, again, in cross-section here, a parietal pericardium and a visceral pericardium and a space in here. This space between the two here is rather important. There is pericardial fluid, but clinically sometimes that can accumulate due to an infection causing causing congestive heart failure. And if that congestive heart failure squeezes on the heart and the pressure squeezes the heart inward to where basically it's like having a vice that's tightening on the heart and not letting the heart relax, you get a condition of a very preventable, very treatable cause of shock that's referred to, guys, as cardiac tamponade. And I've seen images of cardiac tamponade patients, and when you look at that, I want to show you guys what and you can actually see what happens in a case of cardiac tamponade. Let's look at it MRI or echo. Um, Here's a radiology reference to it, and you can actually see that in cardiac tamponade, you can actually squeeze the heart. It actually gets squeezed and it buckles inward, and that because it's caused by a pretty nasty external pressure that will cause that cardiac tamponade. So one of the things they might do is they come in and stick a needle into this space here to draw the fluid out. Now, depending on the cause, if blood is in there, that's not going to fix it. It's just going to be replaced with more blood. This is why one of the things they always do, if you ever break your sternum, right here, two things, if your sternum is ever fractured, that is going to happen because the heart's right behind it, there will be two tests they're going to have to do. A heart enzymes test, looking to see if the heart muscles have died. You're going to look for the CPK and the troponin levels in the blood. And then you're also going to do an EKG and want to check to see if the heart's been damaged due to that. Because if it does that, not only that, but you can get blood filling this up, and you have to go in. Why is there blood filling it up? The aorta itself has been damaged in the chest, and there's blood from the aorta filling up the pericardial sac. It's called an aortic dissection. So some things I want to mention clinically, there's a reason why you need to understand this material. Now, we're going to start with the heart wall. And the heart wall, EME, it's EME, epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. EME, outside in or inside out, EME. You just got to remember EME, EME. So EME, the epicardium is also called visceral pericardium. And you can see right here we have the visceral pericardium or the epicardium. And it is, then the myocardium is the middlemost layer here, very thick with a lot of cardiac muscle tissues, primarily composed of that. There is some connective tissues as well. And then the endocardium, which is very clinically important area because this is where an infection might also go. We talk about pericarditis exists, where you might get strep throat causing pericarditis, infective pericarditis. Well, not only that, but you can get endocarditis, and endocarditis is also very deadly. Bacterial infections will grow on the endocardium, and it creates what we call vegetations. Not vegetation. You're not growing vegetables in there. You're actually growing bacterial colonies. Getting a sip of my iced coffee there. Now, a thin, deep layer of simple squamous it is, which we call an endothelium. Now, endothelium is lining the inside of things like the heart or blood vessels, okay? So there is a difference between mesothelium and endothelium. Though it is the same tissue, it is found is different, okay? Now that it covers the myocardium on the inside surface of the myocardium, your heart's valves, it covers the tendons attached to the valves, and it also is so it lines all that. So infections can get this, causing endocarditis, like a strep throat infection, streptococcus, rogenes, things like that, loves to get in here and attack it. Chains of cocci bacteria. Uh, Now, there is the base and the apex, which we've already talked about. The base is the superior part, and that's where all the great vessels are attached. That's where you're going to find your aorta and vena cava is coming from the base or attached to the base. The apex is the bottom part, very pointed and inferior. Now, there's a groove between the atrium and ventricles you can't see here very well that we could see right here, this groove called the coronary sulcus. And I don't think there is ever an image that identifies coronary sulcus on anything, but it is there and it is something that is identified. Now, what we're going to do is there is a drawing we did in lecture. If you haven't watched it, it will be there. I'm going to do it again here anyway. I always do. And on this, we're going to need, here are the colors you're going to need. This is what I always use. So if you're going to get it handy, if you want to pause, first off, I'm going to use a black, I'm going to use a black pen. Then I'm going to use blue, red, green, and purple. So those are the colors you might want to go ahead and grab up. So go ahead and pause and go ahead and get that. And all right, so welcome back. If you guys pause to go get it. We're going to start out by drawing the heart out, the blood flow through the heart, etc. There's going to be a bunch of things we're going to do. Then I'll come back to the slide that we were doing. But to do this, we're going to draw what I like to call the Minecraft heart or the box heart. And our box heart is to help us understand the flow of blood through the heart, the basics of the heart. It is not meant to be an accurate anatomical representation of the heart. It is meant to be a simplified version, a model of it, to help us understand what is going on. And by doing so, we can understand it more easily. Now, we're going to draw a box like this and two boxes on each side. Now, what I want to do is go ahead and start labeling these boxes. We're going to start with this box here, and we're going to label this box Body Systems. And this box over here, we're going to label Lungs. Okay. So we're going to label these like that, okay? Now what we want to do is go in and label these four small things here. This one here, we're going to label it the right, R-I-G-H-T, atrium. And then down below it here, we're going to label this box the right ventricle. Then we're going to label this one here, on the left side of the heart, the left atrium, making a right and left atria, plural, atria. And then we have the left ventricle. Now, what we want to do is discuss these chambers and things, and we're going to start now with blue. And up here with blue, I'm going to write up here. Now, if you do not have any colors handy, if you just happen to have one pen like this, what you might want to do is make a dotted line, or I'm going to use blue, and this is going to represent deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood. Blood with a very low oxygen content. The hemoglobins here are deoxyhemoglobins. They are not bound to very much oxygen. Most likely they only have, they're at 25% saturation for the most of the time. Your hemoglobin, well, actually, most of the time, your hemoglobin is usually at 75% saturation for most of the time, over most conditions in the body, except for the really active muscle tissues. Okay, now, what we're then going to do is start off here at the body systems, and we're going to bring some deoxygenated blood, and we're going to bring it to the right atrium. Now, the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood. Now, it gets it from three places. And these three places, the first one is called, we'll write it on top here, is the superior, meaning on top, vena cava. Now, if in anatomy, remember, we don't use words we don't need. So, and if in anatomy we don't use words we don't need, if there's a superior vena cava, there must be a what? There must be an inferior vena cava. And the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava bring deoxygenated blood to the right atrium from the body systems. Now, there is one other way to get deoxygenated blood in, and we're going to draw a circle here, and we're going to draw an arrow coming from there, showing deoxygenated blood coming into the right atrium through a hole. And this hole here is called the foramen of coronary sinus. Foramen of coronary sinus. So these are 1, 2, 3 ways in which deoxygenated blood arrives to the right atrium. Now, there is a right atrium, there's also a left atrium. And what separates the left atrium here is on the left atrium, there is a wall called the interatrial septum. And on the interatrial septum, there is an area here that is like a shallow impression called the fossa ovalis. And you can actually see it from the right atrium and the left atrium. The fossa ovalis is for the after after birth is present. During pregnancy, there's a hole here. You have probably heard somebody say that a kid was born with a hole in the heart. Well, they weren't born with a hole in the heart. I imagine there's a hole in the heart wall and blood's pouring out of a ventricle or an atria. But in fact, it's this right here that didn't close up properly after the child was born. It takes about 6 months to close on average. And this little guy right here is called a fossa ovalis. And if it fails to close up, we call it a patent foramen ovale. Foramen ovale is when it's open. Fossa ovalis is when it's closed. So there is a foramen ovale during fetal development, and that will be something I want to draw out later. Now, also what we want to discuss here, guys, is that the atria has some other things that we're going to talk about in a minute. But the left atrium receives a different type of blood. And the left atrium here, we're going to use red, and this is going to be oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood. And if you guys don't have colors handy, I would recommend using a solid line to represent oxygenated blood and a dashed line to represent deoxygenated blood. Now, what we're going to now do is take the lungs and we're going to bring blood from it and bring that oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Now, this is coming to the heart and from the lungs. So this is obviously pulmonary, but these are called pulmonary veins. Veins go to the heart. Arteries always away from heart. Now, there's some other structures we're going to talk about of the atria. We'll get into the papillary muscles and the auricles later on. Now, there is also two ventricles, and there's a wall between the two ventricles here. Now, the wall between the two ventricles is called the interventricular septum. There can be interventricular septal defects during heart's development. This doesn't develop right, and you end up with interventricular septal defect. This happens commonly in a condition called tetralogy of Fallot, which is, of course, tetralogy. I mean, there's 4 things. Now, what's happening here, guys, is in these two ventricles, the right ventricle, this is going to pump deoxygenated blood to the lungs using the pulmonary, now away from the heart, arteries always away, pulmonary arteries, your pulmonary arteries go out here. Now, there's actually 2 pulmonary veins on each side. So your pulmonary arteries go out to the lungs, and that's going to the lungs are going to take in the oxygen, oxygenate that, and it's going to bring that oxygenated blood into the atria here. And then over here we have a left ventricle. Now, there's something we need to do to our left ventricle. Our left ventricle here is going to have to get swole. We want to make it swole now. So we're going to make this thing here dummy thick. We want to make it thick. We're going to make it dummy thick here, okay? So what we're going to do is make it swole. We're going to make sure it is thicker. So let's shade that in too. Shade, shade, shade. I love to shade, 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 shade. I love to shade. my late art teacher from elementary school passed away, we would sing shade, 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 love to shade. Okay, so shade, shade, shade. So this is much thicker, the left ventricle. So we're going to make sure it looks dummy thick here, okay? Now, it pumps good oxygen-rich blood out to the body systems using the aorta. Aorta, know the largest artery in the body is the aorta. Aorta, know it. The aorta takes that blood through here. Now, we are going to fill in some more information in a minute, so hold on to this drawing. We're going to come back to it. We're going to discuss some valves, and then we'll be done with our drawing, okay? Now, this is a big one. But I'm going to tell you guys it's the way to learn it. Now, as we said, there's the right atrium receiving deoxygenated blood from the superior, inferior vena cava and foramen of coronary sinus. There's the interatrial septum separating the two atria. When you are a fetus, during fetal development, you have a hole there called the foramen ovale. Then it closes up after birth. It takes a little while for it to close up, but birth is the stimulus to close up all the fetal shunts that we're going to learn about at the very last. The last slides in this lecture cover that. The fossa ovalis is what's left after it closes up. Foramen ovale closes. Now, the pectinate muscle. Pectinate muscle is the muscles of the anterior wall of the atria. That's what squeezes the atria. The auricles are expanded areas. They are expandable. They allow the atria to hold some extra blood. This is what happens when you guys start exercising, is you have an increase of blood from the body coming back to the atria, especially the right atrium, and it's got to be able to hold all that. So it needs expandability. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from your two, the left and the right pulmonary veins. There's two left and two right pulmonary veins. Veins to the heart. Right ventricle pumps deoxygenated blood, guys. Deoxygenated blood to the lungs. And we're going to talk about the pulmonary arteries in a minute. The interventricular septum separates the two ventricles, the chordae tendineae. Those are very fascinating. And let's talk about chordae tendineae a little bit. Let me see if I already put up my drawing, and I did. Let me grab it from my other side here. I got it sitting somewhere over here. I keep all my drawings. And I'm going to borrow a drawing from my lecture just to show you guys what's going down here, just so I don't have to draw this one again. It's not exactly the greatest thing in the world, but I wanted to explain something to you. So I want you guys to imagine your valves are a lot like a parachute. And here we are parachuting, and we're on a parachute. We are the papillary muscle. The cords on the parachute. The cords are the chordae tendineae, and these are the AV valves. This is an AV valve, okay? Now, what happens is when your atria contract, they force open the AV valves to fill blood into the ventricles. When the atria relax and the ventricles contract, that pushes the valves upwards. Now, the cords' job is to anchor this so that it doesn't blow back out, okay? If you have the cords present, the AV valves will not open up backwards, okay? And these are AV valves, just so you know, atrioventricular valves. Okay, I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to explain. Let's put this drawing back. All right. Now, also what we're going to see is your papillary muscles. They are muscles that contract. They pull the cords taut, tendinous cords, which actually limits the movement of the valves. The cusps of the valves are anchored So they don't go back upwards. They don't prolapse. Prevents a prolapsed valve. Okay. If you've ever heard of mitral valve prolapse, that's a left AV valve going back up into the to the left atrium. Sorry. Now the left ventricle is thicker and it pumps blood through the systemic circuit. That's why it's thicker. It's got to pump blood through the whole body. Okay. Now the right, there are valves, and there are 4 valves here. And I'm going to go ahead and give the mnemonic first, and I'm going to give you guys a simple mnemonic to help you guys remember the valves. And we're going to tell you guys, if you ever found Mr. Lefford passed out on the floor somewhere, maybe I look like I'm dead, and you ever find me, I want you guys to, CPR's not working? Well, just try this. If I'm dead, I'm dead, but try this. Try pulling my aorta. Maybe that'll work. Maybe, yeah. I'm going to die anyway. Might as well try pulling my aorta. Who knows? It might work. All right. Try pulling my aorta. So what do I mean by try pulling my aorta? Let's start here, and we're going to go like this. Woo. Okay. Try. Now, this is the right AV atrioventricular valve, but it is also called the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid. Try to be right. Try to be right. Pulling. There is a pulmonary semi-lunar valve. Try pulling my. There is a left atrioventricular valve. We also call this the bicuspid valve, but we also call it the mitral valve. So try pulling my aorta. There is an aortic semi-lunar. Okay. So when blood comes from the body systems here, you're going to start at the body systems. We're going to come in through the superior and inferior vena cava, arriving to the right atrium, where that deoxygenated blood passes through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. Right ventricle pumps blood out the pulmonary semilunar, pulmonary arteries to lungs. From the lungs, it picks up oxygen. Oxygenated blood arrives through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. And then what's going to happen is that blood then passes through the mitral valve into the thick left ventricle. Left ventricle pumps that blood out through the aortic semilunar valve to the aorta to the body systems. And there we go. Try pulling my aorta. Or toilet paper my A. Whatever anus or A words you want to use for what you might use toilet paper on. And especially in COVID-19, toilet paper, is there anything really more relevant now than toilet paper? He who controls the toilet paper controls the world right now, huh? The white gold. Okay. This is actually everything here. Everything is written down. This is everything. Draw this out as much as you can. It's going to help you guys get this. And I recommend you to draw it. If you want, one of the simple things, very simple way to do this, is to take and draw just the things in black, but don't label anything. Just draw the black outlines. Then what you do is take that piece of paper and slide it in a sheet protector. And then on the sheet protector with like a dry erase marker, label everything, draw on it, wipe it clean, do it over again, wipe it clean. Now, the brain works better by doing this kind of stuff. When you're having to put a pen down and draw it, or a pencil down and draw it, you're having to think, why am I doing this? You have to put more of yourself into it. You get better imprinting on your interneurons in your brain, okay? And I do believe we're not going to be drawing any more today. So I'm going to move back here and discuss. I might reference those, but here are the valves of the heart that we just drew. I do expect you to know the alternate names for the atrioventricular valves. The right AV valve is called the tricuspid. Remember, try to be right. The left atrioventricular valve is also called the bicuspid or the mitral valve. Remember, you should try before you buy. Okay. And here you can actually see this is everything I was showing you guys, but this is basically what I drew here, except in a very simplistic way in a box. But that box's job is to help us understand the flow through a patient. I recommend now one thing, if you guys have a whiteboard and you have some friends you can get around, people you can trust right now that we are lifting some of the social distancing, people you know who aren't sick, if you can be safe about it and you want to get together and have a whiteboard. What I used to do is we would get the students during study groups. We have whiteboards just all everywhere in the study group, and we would get them to be drawing this out. And I used to get my students to do a race with it. We would put people, I would challenge them to race each other, and my students started doing this drawing, and they actually like over spring break, because right when we come back from spring breaks, when I have the exam on this during the spring semester, and they would study during spring break, and they said they turned it into a drinking game. But there's all kinds of things if you want to try to get in, even on like if you guys want to whatever your favorite, like Snapchat or something that is whatever your favorite way of communicating with your friends in a very simple way online, whatever little quick thing. I mean, people were doing things like periscopes and vines and things like that, but people are doing this kind of stuff now through TikTok. You could actually do a TikTok video of yourself. That'd be kind of funny to do. So anyway, that is all those good things there, guys. Now, what we are going to do is the great vessels and the coronary circulation, and then we'll be done. Now, I am going to tell you guys the great vessels. I'm going to show you guys, we're going to talk about the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Now, the superior and inferior vena cava, they carry deoxygenated blood from the systemic circulation to the right atrium. Now, we've drawn that out. The coronary sinus is that vein that's found in the coronary sulcus. That's the border between the atria and the ventricles. And it carries deoxygenated blood from coronary circulation to the right atrium. The pulmonary trunk is going to be like a tree trunk, and it branches into two vessels called pulmonary arteries. It carries deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the lungs. The two pulmonary veins, two per lung, they carry oxygenated blood from the lungs, and the aorta carries oxygenated blood from the left ventricle to systemic circulation, has three divisions: an ascending aorta, the arch, and the descending aorta, three major parts to it. Now, here you can actually see all your great vessels, your superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. You could see the aorta, ascending aorta, arch of aorta. Descending aorta would come down behind the heart. You could see pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, the two pulmonary veins attached to the left atrium here. And you can see all those great vessels. And if you look at this diagram, you can see all the internal structures we talked about. Now, the last thing I'm actually going to discuss here today is the blood supply of the heart. And then I'm going to show you guys what you need to do as your lab activity, basically. What you're going to basically do for labs is kind of different. But so we're going to see there are two major coronary arteries. There's the right and the left. Now, they each will have two branches you have to know. The right coronary artery has the marginal arteries. There are many of them. They come off the sides. They run along the sides of your right ventricle. And the posterior interventricular artery is actually in an area called the posterior interventricular sulcus. That's why we call it the posterior interventricular artery. It's going to be at the back of the heart, and I'm going to show you guys some diagrams and things. The left coronary artery There will be anterior interventricular coming off of that, also called left anterior descending, or the Widowmaker artery. And this is in the anterior interventricular sulcus. And there's a circumflex artery coming off those. Now, then the coronary sinus. Now, there is a great cardiac vein that drains into the coronary sinus, a posterior vein of the left ventricle, or posterior cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein, and small cardiac vein. Now let's take a look at these. Here we have our right coronary artery coming off, and it gives rise to these marginal arteries. Here's one of them, here's one, here's one, here's one, okay? And then that continues to wrap around the back here. Here again is the right coronary artery wrapping around, and in the posterior cardiac sulcus here is the posterior interventricular artery. Then we have our left coronary artery passing behind the pulmonary trunk, branching off to give the anterior interventricular artery, or the Widowmaker, and then the circumflex. Now the circumflex continues wrapping around here and goes here and actually pairs with the posterior cardiac vein. Now, one of the things that I give a mnemonic in lecture is PC Gamps right. PC, posterior cardiac vein, posterior interventricular artery, here, posterior interventricular artery, PC, PC Gamps right, GAMP, MP, middle cardiac vein goes to the posterior interventricular artery. PC Gamps right. Now I gotta remember how PC Gamps right actually works. Posterior interventricular artery. What about the posterior cardiac vein? Where is posterior cardiac vein? Goes with the circumflex. Posterior cardiac vein and circumflex go together. PC Gamps, great cardiac vein. GA, great cardiac vein here, goes with the anterior interventricular artery, PC. GAM, middle cardiac vein here goes MP, posterior interventricular artery. S right, small cardiac vein goes with the right coronary artery. Okay. Now, this is where I'm going to stop for this lab, but there's a few things I'm going to show you guys. Now, you notice I didn't point everything out because there is a lab component, and I'm trying to kind of get that lab component. How we do that is, if you look at the back, I have a study guide that has definitions, things you need to fill out. Then down here, I've got the heart models. You need to go through as part of your lab activity. Now, you don't get grades for it, but these images here will be the exact ones used on your laboratory midterm. So I use these pictures, and I will say, name this thing, and I take them from here. These are the ones that I'm using. Now, as you study for blood vessels, just as a reminder, it's the diagrams, but I'm using I'm using these as well. I will change them for future use down the line, but I'm using those right now, these that have the lines on it, because that's what I had access to when we went online initially. So here is a study guide. Go fill that little study guide out as well. And but for the heart, it will be only models, with exception of one diagram, and you guys would actually see it down here that I've given you guys that diagram that I might use here to practice labeling it. And I got to go down through here and find it. Where have I put it? This one here. This is a diagram that will be on your exam, probably is on your exam. Now, these are not on the exam, and I actually tell you when those diagrams aren't. But all these diagrams and all these models, every one of them is on your lab exam. There will be something from everything here, okay? So guys, thank you so much. I really hope this helps. But this is kind of what I want you guys to do. Now, every lab, you notice I say those things, but I want to make sure you guys know where to find it, know what to look for. So guys, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Just remember, you got to combine arteries and veins. Thank you guys so much and have a great day.